Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Your Highness, Sheikh Hamouza bint Nasser, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Qatar and to WISE 2014. I also welcome those around the world who are joining us online. We gather this week through our shared commitment to innovation and action in building the future of education. Today, global education stands at a crossroads. With the deadline of 2015 Millennium Development Goals approaching, we have a unique opportunity in the months ahead to define the global education agenda for the next decade. An agenda for action and results. An agenda that responds to issues of access and quality. The challenges are numerous. Nearly 60 million children and young people around the world still lack access to school, particularly in fragile states and in the regions of conflict. A further 250 million children are at risk of leaving school without basic literacy and numeracy skills. But the education challenges are not limited to the developing world. Even in developed nations, challenges abound. This is why education is a global imperative. Students are disengaged, teachers are demotivated, and graduates find it more and more difficult to translate their qualification into gainful employment. Education is no longer the engine for social mobility it once was. There is an urgent need to close the gap between the education we have and the education we need. At WISE, we believe education system must be reinvigorated through innovation. Providing a quality education is not simply an economic necessity, but a moral imperative. Qatar is a country that believes strongly in education. His Highness the Emir, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, has described it as one of our national priorities. For 2 decades, Qatar Foundation has been working to improve lives in Qatar and abroad through education under the leadership of its chairperson, Her Highness Sheikh Hamouza bint Nasser. Her Highness has been a passionate advocate of universal access to quality education as a key to individual empowerment and social transformation. She launched WISE in 2009 because it was clear that education needed to innovate in order to meet the demands of present and future generations. Since then, WISE has gained a reputation for identifying and promoting innovative practices in education and supporting collaboration among a growing community of education leaders and thinkers. We are proud of our accomplishments, but aware that much remains to be done. As we gather for these 3 days, let us reflect on the opportunities before us. Our theme this year is invitation to explore our creativity as learners, educators, business leaders, and policymakers. We know that our societies are increasingly dependent on empowered individuals who can collaborate and can combine critical thinking, curiosity, and determination. Indeed, as we reflect on the challenges we face as a global community, we recognize that the crucial role that creativity plays in developing solutions. By focusing on creativity this week, we want to explore with you the role it can play not only as a part of the learning process, but also as a necessary outcome of education. In other words, the question we need to answer is, how do we develop creative schools and systems that inspire creative learners? We will discuss how creativity arises, how it can be taught, how it can be measured, and most importantly, how it can enable and support all learners. Finding creative solutions to enhance access to quality education remains a high priority. Her Highness's Education Above All Foundation will hold a special session tomorrow on this crucial topic. We hope the questions around creativity will be brought to life at WISE this week. In addition to our debates, keynotes, and workshops, you will find more informal opportunities for networking and interactivity in the Majlis and the Creative Lab. I hope you will take advantage of this many opportunities this week and practice actively in WISE. I am confident we can bring fresh vigor to our shared quest for new creative solutions. WISE will always be an international platform, but we are also committed to voicing the perspective of local and regional educational communities, as well as being resources for them. This year, we have partnered with a number of local organizations to offer various activities before and during WISE. I wish to thank these organizations for their collaboration: the Supreme Education Council, Qatar Museums, Teach for Qatar, Lusail, the World Innovation Summit for Health, and Qatar Cultural Village. We hope to do more in the years to come to support Her Highness' vision of Qatar as a center of excellence in education. Ladies and gentlemen, before I conclude, I would like to take a moment to remember a committed friend of WISE, Mr. Emilio Putin, whose loss earlier this year we felt deeply. Mr. Putin was chairman of Banco Santander, one of our key partners and supporters, and a true champion of the cause of education around the world. We shall miss his steadfast support and friendship. Finally, I would like to thank you, the WISE community, for your participation, ideas, and presence. Let us take what we learn here and together build a brighter future for all through education. Thank you very much.
Your Highness, Excellencies, friends, and colleagues, Assalamu alaikum, bonjour, buenos dias, good morning. As Jim suggested, when we affirm creativity to be at the heart of education, we immediately encounter resistances. We immediately encounter popular misconceptions. Two in particular. Number one, the belief that somehow creativity is just given to a few people. There are only a few people who are born with creative gifts and talents. The rest of us just bump along. The second, before we go to the second misperception, let me deal with that one, because that's a quick and easy one, isn't it? Anyone who works with children or has studied child development knows that we are all born curious, creative, imaginative. That is the human DNA. We learn by exploring the world. We learn and understand by inventing, as Jean Piaget said. The average 4-year-old asks 100 questions a day. Most kindergartners think of themselves as artists. But by the time children have become, say, 12 years old, they've come to understand that it's much more important to give the right answers than to ask good questions. They've come to understand they're not in school to create, but rather to absorb knowledge. The second misperception is that creativity is somehow a frill, an extracurricular activity, something that's kind of nice to have, but not essential. Now, to confront that view, we must deeply understand fundamental changes that have taken place in our world in the last few years with surprising speed. For most of human history, the people who had the greatest respect in our communities, in our companies, in our countries, were those who had acquired the greatest knowledge. Throughout human history, we have revered people who have acquired more knowledge than the rest of us. And our degrees from our schools and universities certify the acquisition of more knowledge than other people may have. That competitive advantage is disappearing very rapidly. Why? Today, knowledge has become a commodity. It's free. It's like air. It's like water. It's on every internet-connected device. What that means is the world simply no longer cares how much you know. No competitive advantage. Because the person next to you can go figure it out and learn it just in time. Rather, what the world cares about, what matters most, is not what you know, but what you can do with what you know. And that's a brand new and very different education problem. Because now it's not a matter of, it's not enough to have content knowledge. Sure, that's important. Necessary, but not sufficient. So what that means is that increasingly around the world, I'm encountering people who don't trust these credentials that schools and colleges give out, certifying that you have served a certain amount of seat time and acquired a certain amount of knowledge. A couple of examples. You know, Google, famous company, used to be they only hired people from name brand colleges with the highest test scores and grades. And you couldn't even get an interview at Google unless you'd gone to certain universities. Well, they hired a guy by the name of Laszlo Bock who ran the data and discovered that these indices were, quote, worthless. His words. Google has totally revamped their hiring process. They no longer ask for your college transcript. In fact, 15% of their new hires don't have a college degree at all. What are they looking for? People who know how to tackle complex analytic problems. And that's what they ask for in structured interviews. They want to know your experience. They want to know what you can do, not what you know. I thought Google's maybe a one-off kind of crazy Silicon Valley company, but I was in Ho Chi Minh City last winter at an event sponsored by Deloitte, the accounting and consulting company. I was talking to the CEO over lunch. She didn't know anything about Google, but she said, you know, we no longer hire our best students from our best universities anymore. They don't work out so well, she told me. Instead, we look for good students, and we put them through a kind of summer camp in order to understand how they work together to solve problems. Talking to a CEO of a startup recently, she said, you know, I have the worst time hiring people, and she's in Boston. She interviews kids from MIT and Harvard and places like that. She said, I just want somebody who can go in and figure it out. Heck of a job description. Just go figure it out. She can't find students who can do that. What the world wants, in a word, are people who can innovate. And more knowledge does not necessarily mean greater capabilities for innovation. So what I've been trying to do for the last few years is really understand what must we do differently to develop capabilities for innovation. Now, there are two kinds of innovators I've learned. One is someone who brings new possibilities to life, whether it's in art or technology. And that may be fairly rare in human experience. That may be more a matter of certain innate gifts. But the other kind of innovation, the one that is needed at least as much, is someone who can solve problems creatively, who brings new ways of thinking, new ways of connecting to the solution of problems, to the asking and answering of complex questions, to the creation of new knowledge. So I've been trying to understand what must we do differently as parents, as teachers, as mentors, and as employers to develop the capabilities of many, many more of our young people to be the creative problem solvers that they want to be and that we need them to become. I started interviewing a wide range of young people in their 20s from all over the world, some from privilege, some from poverty. Some from developed countries, some from developing countries, all over the world. I interviewed their parents, trying to understand if there were patterns of parenting that had helped them to become the creative problem solvers that, in fact, they were. I asked them about their education. Very interesting. One of my first discoveries is that they had become innovators in spite of their schooling, not because of it. Some of them had gone to the world's leading universities, Harvard, Stanford, MIT. They could not talk about anything in their formal course work that had contributed to their capacities as a creative problem solver. But then I asked them, can you name a teacher who's made a significant difference in your life? And almost all of them could name at least one teacher, and it was from kindergarten all the way to graduate school, rarely more than one or two. So I interviewed those teachers, watched them teach, and I came to understand something deeply troubling. In every single case, the teachers who had made the greatest difference in the lives of these young innovators was an outlier. Someone who taught in ways that were fundamentally different than his or her peers. Yet remarkably similar to one another, I discovered, and also similar to the kind of teaching you see in places like the Montessori classrooms, Reggio Emilia classrooms, MIT's Media Lab, and places of that sort. And so what I've come to understand is that the culture of schooling, as we have continued to practice and perpetuate it, is fundamentally and radically at odds with a culture of learning that develops the capabilities to innovate. There are 5 fundamental challenges. Number 1, culture of learning is all about celebrating and measuring individual achievement. Well, that's fine, except that innovation is above all a team sport. There is no innovation without deep collaboration. Knowing this, these teachers built accountable collaboration into every single assignment they gave, and they team taught whenever they could. Number 2, the culture of schooling is all about compartmentalizing knowledge and favoring specialization. But the problem is, innovation happens at the boundaries of academic disciplines, almost never within them. Knowing this, these teachers built interdisciplinary courses around challenging problems that needed solving or understanding. Contradiction number 3 is the culture of classrooms. Around the world, it's so often a culture of passivity and consumption, and even infantilization. There's only one expert in the room, that's the person at the front doing all of the talking. By contrast, teachers interested in innovation think of themselves as coaches, whose job it is to coach students to a higher performance standard and to empower students to solve real problems and to create, not merely consume. Contradictions 4 and 5 are the most challenging of all. Contradiction number 4 is all about the F word, failure. It's the worst thing that can happen in school. It's what we have nightmares about. The fear of failure creates a climate of compliance and of risk aversion throughout education for teachers as much as for students. The problem is, innovation demands that you take risks, that you make mistakes, and that you fail. IDEO, Sandy Spiker is here from IDEO. She will tell you, IDEO has a company motto, the most innovative company in design in the world. Their company motto is fail early and fail often. Other companies talk about failing fast, failing forward, failing cheap, but failing. Why? Because there is no innovation without trial and error. There's no learning without trial and error. I went to the D school at Stanford, and very worried about this issue of assessment and grading. They said, yeah, we're kind of thinking F is the new A. Now, I don't recommend taking that back to your school systems just yet. Needs a little refinement. But finally, I talked to a young woman at the Olin College of Engineering, extraordinary college. She said, we don't talk about grades or GPAs, but we obsess about iteration. My new favorite word, iteration. Moving from 1.0 to 2.0. Learning how to reflect on your mistakes, reflect on your work, and apply what you've learned to your next effort. Knowing this, these teachers assess students on a body of work. And very often, the grade was merely credit, no credit, not A, B, C, D, F. The last challenge is all about motivation, isn't it? Because as you know, we rely heavily on extrinsic incentives to motivate learning. Carrots and sticks, fear of failure, and rewards with good grades or money or cars. The problem is, I discovered, that throughout the world, the young innovators whom I have interviewed, again, from privilege and poverty, were far, far more intrinsically motivated, wanting to make a difference, much more than they wanted to make A's or money. So I went back, trying to understand what had their parents and teachers done to develop the intrinsic motivation that was so common among these many, many young people. And I found another pattern. In every case, both parents and teachers had encouraged explicitly three things: play, passion, and purpose. Parents encouraged much more exploratory play, fewer toys, toys without batteries, more time outside. They limited screen time. Teachers tried to build a spirit of play into the kind of teaching they did. Ed Carrier, who teaches engineering at Stanford, talked about bringing an element of whimsy into the kinds of assignments he gave his teams of students. As students grow older, the parents were very observant, trying to understand what most engaged and interested their young people, because they believed that for a young person to find and pursue a real interest that could become a passion was much more important than mere academic achievement for its own sake. It's where we learn grit, tenacity, perseverance, self-regulation, self-discipline. So they've supported and celebrated their child's interest no matter what it was. Teachers, the same, tried to build time into the curriculum for young people to explore their ideas, their interests, to stay curious. As these young people grew older, their passions morphed, they evolved, they changed, but in every case they matured to a deeper sense of purpose, a desire to give back or in some way make a difference. That's because both parents and teachers had instilled one simple lesson: the idea that we are not here on this earth just to serve ourselves. We have some responsibility to give back and to make a difference, and to try to understand and empathize with those who are very different from ourselves. So I have very little time left, but let me simply suggest some critical steps we must consider as we think about how to move away from the culture of schooling to a culture of innovation in schools. First and foremost, we must agree on the outcomes that matter most. We are defining and measuring old, wrong, obsolete outcomes. More content knowledge. Content knowledge you can find right here. We must agree on core competencies as the most important outcome, using rich and challenging content to acquire them. Critical thinking, the ability to ask really good questions, collaboration, communication, and creative problem solving. Secondly, we must assess the outcomes that matter most. What gets tested is what gets taught. What gets measured is what matters. Unless and until we develop sophisticated assessments of the outcomes that matter most, they will not be taught. I want to see every young person begin school with a digital portfolio that follows them through school, where they begin to acquire evidence of mastery of core competencies. And they graduate with a certificate of mastery, not a certificate of seat time served. To create that kind of new education, we need to fund and incent educational research and development. And this is what WISE does so well. And I'm so excited and proud to be a part of this effort, because you are trying to find the leading educators and support them and embrace their work. That's educational R&D. There is no innovation without R&D. You know, all of the leading companies of the world have a research and development budget. Where are your educational R&D budgets? We want to incent teams of teachers to create new interdisciplinary courses, new approaches to assessment, and ultimately to create laboratory schools that are exemplars, existence proofs of radically different forms of education. And those lab schools must eventually become the schools that prepare the next generation of teachers. Finally, I want to see every class have Google time. You know what Google time is? You go to work for Google, you have permission to play on company time a day a week. What if we said to every young person, you have this certain percentage of time to be the architect of your own learning in every classroom? What if there was more play, passion, and purpose in every classroom? And what does it look like? So for the last 2 years, I've been working with a team to create a feature-length documentary film to show what this kind of education can look like. We brought a little 3-minute clip along with us to show you. But if you want to see a larger clip and stay informed, go to learninginnovation.us. learninginnovation.us. But let's roll this little clip and see what you think.
The philosophy of High Tech High is founded largely on the idea of kids making, doing, building, shaping, and inventing stuff. The engineers that I know, the architects I know, the artists I know, the great educators that I know, the entrepreneurs that I know, are all sort of perplexed and curious about how they can do it better the next time. And that type of perplexity leads to engagement, it leads to learning, it leads to innovation. We're trying to have that type of perplexity and curiosity get inculcated in our students in everyday practices.
We had to learn about civilizations, the Mayans, the Romans, and the Greeks. And Scott and Mike didn't want to just teach us this, so they came up with this big wheel, which is a big gear, which has a lot of drawings on it, and is connected to all these other mechanisms, and they each represented our theory.
Then they had to, on their own, develop and defend an idea on why they think civilizations rise and fall.
So we had to create like a flow chart just explaining what our theory was, and then we got critiques on it, and then we created a group one.
Another piece is on the mechanical side. They need to take what's already an abstract concept with their theory, and they have to take that and actually physically manifest it. They have some very preliminary metrics they need to use. They know that there's going to be a big wheel turning at a certain RPM. They know how many teeth that is, so they have basically a box to work within, some bounds to work within, and they have to make everything.
Yeah, I can get it one.
Oh, I put the wrong side in. Oh my God.
So we have an exhibition that we're preparing for right now, and it'll be tomorrow night, and there will be thousands of people here looking at student work, students presenting their work, visitors looking at the work, students presenting their work to each other. And I think that idea of making work public, that's a missing piece to me in schools in general.
This idea of sort of making something and having a public exhibition and having people come look at it. And you have that feeling that we all have, like, how did they do that? When kids have that feeling, it's transformative for them. I made this, and everyone's coming to look at it.
Let me leave you with one final thought. You know, we are dependent upon consumer spending in most of the world's economies, far too much so in my view. I believe that approach to economic development of focusing on consumer spending is unsustainable environmentally, economically, spiritually. What if? What if instead of educating our children to be consumers, we educated them to be creators? What if we educated them to be creative problem solvers and working to solve the major problems and challenges we all face around the world, beginning with the issue of sustainability? Thank you very much.
I think that China is really facing a lot of innovation issues. The government actually is planning to build an innovative country by 2020. And China has actually proposed innovation as a national strategy recently. And of course, also talent as a strategy to revitalize China. As you probably know, China has about 200 million migrant workers. That was made in China. It happened in the last number of years. Now, China trying to become, to have this 200 million future college graduates that among China's population to be the really innovative forces. So how to become really training those innovative forces? It's really a big challenge for China.
Twitter, like many companies in Silicon Valley, tried initially to pull away from that old Google model that Dr. Tony Wagner was telling us about, where people had to come from certain pedigree universities in order to even get an interview. And so early on, the Twitter co-founders, some of them, well, none of them went to fancy universities, and some of them didn't finish university. So they were very passionate about this idea of looking for alternative candidates. Unfortunately, at Twitter, as happens at many startups, when you become a large corporation, companies can't figure out how to scale that model. And so they end up sort of receding back to these old resumes and the old pedigree universities being things that really pull people out of the pile and get them interviews in a fast-tracking basis.
The role models that are perpetuated throughout the education system in Kuwait, which is pretty much, I think, status quo through the region, are pretty much historical religious figures. And of course, they never made mistakes, at least the book says so. And so what you have is this reinforcement of the idea of, real men or real women don't make mistakes. And so what happens is that people are that much less likely to go off and venture for fear of, because we are a shame-based society. It's very group-oriented. And so one of the challenges, I think, for people who are in your positions as ministers of education, trying to overcome the resistance and rewriting the stories. I think the stories of the people we have as role models are absolutely fascinating role models. I just think that there's twists to those stories to make them more human, to have people be able to, he reached that high level, but here are the mistakes he made along the way. Here are the bad decisions. Here's what he learned. And I think that can go a long way in terms of rewriting the story and helping kids take that step and failing.
Also, I think it's more important is the care, is the compassion for failure. For example, in China, I just said we have 200 million migrant workers, and they have 50 million children left behind in the rural areas. So they need the care, and they need the attention, and they need encouragement. And that's really the key for the success of achievement.
A child in a low-income country and a child in a developed country has the same potential, is the same child. The difference is the opportunities which one child has and the other child doesn't have. So it's not, So it's not a question of whether you are here or there. 3 days ago, I was in Uganda. And I visited one of the slums where there is a very small training center for young women who are mothers already. They don't have much of education, but they are being supported to, one, to improve a little bit of education, one, to develop skills. And then they had a dream wall, and in which every one of them would say what they would like to achieve. I cried when I read that dream wall. One of them was saying, I want to own a business and be the managing director of my business. It is a girl who is 16, as I said. She is already a mother. She hardly can read and write, but she's being given an opportunity to think beyond her daily circumstances and to be able to know what she would. And I said to the lady, I said, we have to follow these children. We have to make sure that we create the opportunities for them. As she says, yes, to own a business. And so the dreams, what I want to say is that the dreams of a girl in circumstances of challenge like this are not different of the dreams of a girl who can be in a better position.
So far, the discussion seems to be still in the economic narrative. It seems that innovations and creativity is basically for jobs, for employment, for production. But human lives are far more than that. We have our family lives, we have our cultural lives, political lives, religious lives, and all those. Does innovation apply to them as well?
Okay, Claire, you look really keen to just say something.
I want to weigh in. There's a phrase, we are human beings, we aren't human doings, that is big in Silicon Valley. And in Silicon Valley, sort of the way that we try to address this work-life balance thing is by bringing in things into the workplace, right? Meditation rooms, yoga rooms, things like that. It's amazing, but it doesn't go far enough at all. What we really need to be doing is saying, go home and find that.
Yeah.
I've recently graduated from a Bachelor's of Early Childhood, and I'm currently teaching in an international preschool. And as a teacher, I was trained by an American institution to integrate creativity as a huge part of the curriculum. But I also face a lot of feedback or questions or doubts from parents. Now, it's a systematic way of thinking, and how do we as teachers, how do ministers or people from a higher authority help parents understand that this is creativity is an imperative for their child's growth?
In my 3 years as an education minister in my country, it felt like teachers were suspicious of change, parents were suspicious of politicians trying to lead change, and the great British newspapers like the Daily Mail were the dragging anchor on any kind of progress at all. How does that compare to your time as an education minister in Mozambique and then the leadership you've shown in the years since? What's the key to leading public opinion and especially parental opinion to embrace this sort of change we're talking about?
I think we tried. We did not succeed, but we tried to even create a connection between what we call the school, the community, and the parents. When I say community, we were talking about community leaders, but parents, and even to encourage to have days in which parents would be interacting with teachers, because that's correct. I mean, a child can be 5, 6, or 8 hours at school and then goes back home. These two worlds have to communicate, have to make sure that they synchronize somehow the interest of supporting this young life, to unleash, as we are talking about, the potential.
I found that cultural integration and also exchanges are very important. For example, China has about 3 or 4 million students going abroad. And then when they come back, when they have this international education and the cultural difference immersion, when they come back and then they study the internet, they study high tech, they study all kinds of stuff. So creativity is not that everybody can do, but if you expose to a creative culture, as much as you can, then you can become very creative.
One of the things that kind of struck me in today's keynote was this idea of passion, and that's something that I really, I have a son that's passionate about football, one that's passionate about basketball, one that's passionate about bugs. He's just the bugs, and for me, I see the importance of that. Growing up, I was passionate about the Beatles. Why, I don't know. They were already disbanded. But I think when you're passionate about something and your parents nurture it, it can lead to things in the future.
When I was applying to university, all the rage was to be good at everything, right? To be well-rounded. And we've completely shifted away from that. And as Sir Ken Robinson says in The Element, it's all about finding what you're really good at. So pursue that one thing where you can put all your creativity into it and get really good at that. And that's how you can get a job anywhere you want or create the business you want. It's to be really good at the thing that you're meant to do.
In talking about revolution, what we're missing out on is, okay, you have the revolution, you change the education system, who's going to teach? Because you can't have the same teachers.
Yeah.
So so one way to kind of do it is to train teachers in that way, and you can have both systems in place. Parents who are happy with this system use that.
I think we have to understand that a radical change does not happen at the pace of how society, the dynamics of society work. So I think we need to engage parents, acknowledging that some sort of resistance will exist along the way, but if we are very clear that the change we are looking for is dictated because the world itself has changed. So we have no choice except to support our children to achieve a level in which they are in tune in the world they live in. And that's where creativity comes in.
So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much indeed for tearing yourselves away from lunch to join me here. This is always the toughest session in the day for a speaker. You know, you've had an exciting morning, you've had a nice lunch, and then you gather and settle down in the nice, comfortable seats. And obviously the temptation is to slip off into a nice sleep. So we're keeping all the lights on bright so I can keep an eye on you. As said, we've been delivering programs initially in England and now in quite a lot of other programs. And I was very pleased with the session this morning because I think it sets us up very well for what I wanted to move on to this afternoon. And I think the two key questions which kept coming up from the floor were about, first of all, what do we mean by creativity? What definition of creativity is it that we're using? And secondly, what does it actually look like in the classroom? What is it that we're asking teachers to do? And that's very much the focus of the work that we are doing. Now, a key theme in this presentation is obviously about motivation. And I'm sure many of you as educators will probably recognize this boy and have seen him in class. In all the countries that we operate in, whether it's in Wales or Scotland or Western Australia or Lithuania or Pakistan, we find that teachers say to us when we say, what's the real problem you have? And they go, it's the lack of motivation and engagement of the children. And the reasons they give are always different. In Western Australia, they have full employment. Every boy in school knows he's going to get a well-paid job in the mining industry. So the boys sit in class and go, why do I have to learn anything? I've got a job coming my way. It's no effort. In some of the deprived communities in Wales in which we work, the young people say, why do we have to work? We're not going to get jobs. My parents haven't got jobs. My grandparents haven't had jobs. This has gone on for 3 generations and so forth. But ultimately, it seems to me that the reason we have this problem with motivation in education is that we sell education to young people by saying, work hard and you'll get a great life. And they don't necessarily believe you. And the core of re-engaging young people in education has got to be to make education intrinsically an interesting experience. Because if you do that, then you will hold them. And the promise of some future benefit will no longer be the key to what you say. Now, a few years ago, I was visiting one of our schools in England and seeing some work that we'd been doing there. And at the end, someone came up to me and said, oh, there's a boy here, a 16-year-old boy. He's making a short film about your program, Creative Partnerships. Could he interview you? And I said, yes. And we went to the school director's office, and I sat down, and the boy was there. He had a video camera. He asked me some questions, and I went away. And I thought no more about it, except 4 weeks later, I got a DVD in the post, and this video is what was on it.
My name is Paul Collard. I'm National Director of Creative Partnerships. At its heart, Creative Partnerships is about making education a better experience for young people and making sure that they leave school with a set of skills that are going to set them up properly to be a success in the 21st century. Ultimately, if Creative Partnerships is going to have a long-term impact, then it is going to be an impact on teachers, because we can't forever be in schools doing that. What we have to do is to be able to work with teachers and bring around changes in what they do. If you get the right creative process going, and you step on the outside and you're watching people, people are at their most alive when they're doing that. They're completely focused, engaged in this different place. And it's that look of absolute rapt fascination that you get across people's faces that makes it all worthwhile. You think, that's absolutely living, actually.
I can't see any resemblance myself. A few weeks after I got that video, I was having a meeting with the directors of some big advertising companies in England. And advertising is a very big sector of the English economy. It generates lots of jobs. They're really well-paid jobs, and as a result, lots of people want them. So it's very competitive to get in. But what's been going on is that the advertising agencies create unpaid internships so that young people can work to get experience so that they can then apply to jobs. And a lot of young people now do this for up to 2 years. But what that means is that only rich young people can afford to do that. So children from poorer backgrounds can't afford to work in London for free for 2 years, and so they don't get the jobs. And we were having a discussion about creating better pathways for young people into this kind of employment. And the directors of the advertising agencies weren't very sympathetic. They were business people. They wanted to run businesses. But I said to them after a while, can I show you a video? And they said yes. And I showed them that video. And they all wanted that boy's telephone number there and then, because they wanted to ring him up and offer him a job. But what was really interesting to me is they didn't know they wanted that until they saw the video. There was never going to be an advert in a newspaper. That boy had created a job for himself, which now people wanted. And that is the nature of the world in which young people are growing up into. Many of the jobs students in school today will do have not yet been invented. And in the old educational paradigm, the idea was that you went to school and you learned what you needed to learn in order to do the job that you got. But if school has no idea what job you're going to have, what do you teach them in school? Because what the world is looking for now is not job seekers, but job creators. And this is a really big change. And for young people, it's very, very scary. Now, it's important also that we define what we mean by creativity at this stage, because creativity is what's going to enable them to become the job creators of the future. We've commissioned a lot of work on this and researched it, and in fact, one of the main people who's helped us here has been Guy Claxton, who's speaking right now in another hall. And we've come up with this definition of creativity, which we call the 5 habits of mind. And they are inquisitive, imaginative, persistent, disciplined, and collaborative. Now, a lot of people associate creativity with imagination. You have lots of great ideas and so forth. And we've heard quite a lot today about collaboration. When I show this slide, people are quite often surprised, though, to see that we have persistence and discipline. But in my view, it is not creative to have lots of ideas and then not to be able to implement those ideas. Creativity is the capacity to implement new, wonderful ideas. And discipline, persistence, and resilience are absolutely central to that process. And these are the set of characteristics that in our work we focus on in developing in young people. Now, McKinsey's have recently done a big survey. They surveyed 62,000 educators, business people, and young people in Europe. Because in Europe, as you know, at the moment, we have a huge crisis of youth unemployment. And they were looking at what's gone wrong. And there were some really interesting statistics that came out. 33% of businesses in Europe feel that their businesses are suffering serious damage because of skills shortages. 27% of businesses can't fill vacancies because of it. But meantime, there are millions of young people who can't have jobs. There's also huge changes in the profile of the employment sector. A lot of women in Europe now come back to school, come back to work much quicker after having children. A lot of people can't afford to retire, so they stay in jobs. So whilst in Europe we actually have more jobs than ever before, the workforce is staying in those jobs, and the young people coming out neither have the skills nor the ability to create the jobs that could make the change. And when you ask employers what skills can't they find, this is what comes out. The primary, secondary, and tertiary refers to sectors of the economy. Primary is agriculture and mining, secondary is manufacturing, and so forth. And you can see some of them say, we have difficulty finding maths, we have difficulty finding proficiency in languages. But the really big ones are in creativity, teamwork, collaboration, work ethic, which is the same as we mean by discipline and persistence, and so forth. So employers are saying exactly the same, which is these are the skills that we can't find in young people, and this is why we find it difficult to give them jobs. And as you can see, there's a very strong overlap between what employers told McKinsey's and what we think creativity is. It's worth just thinking for a minute or two also about what's happening in school. We heard a lot this morning about PISA and about this high-stakes testing and the impact that this has on the regimes which exist in schools. And there's a couple of slides, though, that come from PISA, which make very interesting reading here. In addition to sitting an exam in language, mathematics, and science, young people are also asked how interested they are in the subject. And the reason they're asked how interested they are in the subject is that the predictor of going on to become a scientist is how interested you are in the subject and how good you think you are, not actually your test score. Einstein's a great example. He wasn't a great student. He only got a third-class degree at university. When he finished university, he couldn't get a job as an academic. But he was so interested and confident that he wrote the theory of relativity whilst working as a secretary. Now, when you put together interest in science and science scores, it looks like this. The little black dots are the countries. And right at the top, you can see a little black dot which says Finn for Finland, because we all know that Finland always comes top in PISA. But the truth is that their pupils are the least interested in science, and none of them have any intention of going on and studying science. And that if you exist in an environment in which you've taught young people to be really good at tests, you might in fact have defeated the purpose, because in doing that, you've actually drained the interest in the subject out of them. Also, really interestingly, this is looking at the relationship between maths scores in PISA and entrepreneurial capacity. So we say what the world is looking for is actually not job seekers, but job creators. But we can see that there is an inverse relationship between the math scores and the entrepreneurial capacity. So in the blue is the math scores, and you can see Singapore, Korea, Taiwan, Finland. Fantastic. But none of the kids think they're any good at business, and none of them are planning to go and start them, and so forth. So again, what is it you've really achieved by getting these high test scores? Now, I come back to the core. We've run thousands of projects in England. We had around 2,500 schools in the program every year. The program doesn't actually run in England now, but we're developing big programs in Wales and in Scotland, and we have programs in Lithuania and Hungary and Czech Republic and even in Pakistan. And so we're working in many hundreds of schools. And we've always been really interested in research. Picking up another theme from this morning, we've always commissioned a lot of research. In the early days, we researched, did the program have a good impact on test results, on attendance, on parental involvement, and so forth? And all these answers were yes, it absolutely does. And as we moved on, we then asked ourselves the question, why? Why does the program have this positive impact? And we sent researchers into classrooms and got them to sit there watching what was happening. And they all came back and said the same thing. In these classes in which young people are really engaged, motivated, and achieving well, the management of the classroom has a set of characteristics in common, and they look like this. On the left-hand side, you have what we call the low-functioning classroom, which is more like a traditional education environment. And on the right is the high-functioning classroom, which is the kind of learning environment which we help teachers deliver. Now, the first thing to say is it's wrong to imagine that low is always bad and high is always good. There are some pupils who learn really well in a low-functioning classroom. They like sitting there quietly, listening to their teacher for hours, writing down notes, learning it off by heart, and then going and regurgitating it all in exams. And they then do very well in the education system, and they go to university, and they come back as teachers, and they go, so what's the problem? But what you need is a mixture of these things. And interestingly enough, in the speeches this morning, most of these points came up. You need to set challenges, not just to lead young people to the answers. It needs to feel authentic. It needs to be connected with their real life. If they can't see the connection between what you're teaching them and how their lives are going to lead, they give up. I think one of the saddest statistics at the moment are in those countries who are rolling out education for the first time to communities who haven't had it and do really well for the first 2 or 3 years, and then the children suddenly stop coming. There was an instance in Cambodia that I was reading about the other day. Because the question is, how's this relevant to my life in my community? Where is this actually connected? Time needs to be used much more flexibly. The organization of space, it's much more about getting people to work as if they were in a studio, focused on their tasks rather than focused on their teachers. Group work is very important. Collaboration is at the heart of a lot of these processes. And the visibility of processes have to be very high. That was another point which came out of Tony's speech this morning, when he was saying you have to be able to see the learning and you have to be able to share it. And a lot of time in school, teachers writing or speaking, pupils taking notes, nobody knows what the notes are like. If the person submits a piece of work, the teacher sees it, no one else sees it. That's low visibility learning, and it's not very motivating. And emotions have to be part of the learning. There's a book that has been published in the last 3 or 4 weeks by the OECD on mathematics, How to Teach Maths for High Performance. And it places emotion at the center of teaching mathematics. Where emotion is engaged and connected, you get the highest attainment, the greatest motivation, and engagement. And what one is looking for is self-managing learners, and reflection all the time is central to that process. So our role as an organization has been to work with teachers to help teachers use this in the classroom. And I don't think any of this is radically new. I mean, I know from Vicky Colbert's work is that this is very much what has been going on in her schools for all these years. It was taking these same principles and applying them to the development of curriculum and the way in which learning took place amongst her children. I want to give you a couple of examples here. So this is a high-functioning classroom in Lithuania. And one of the questions this morning was about primary schools, and the 2 examples I'm going to give you are from primary schools. So this is a literacy class. And the challenge that we were working with the school on is that the children were not learning their letters. And so the basic building blocks of learning to read and write was not happening. And working with them, we said, well, we think the problem here is the children are not listening. If you listen to your environment, you will hear letters. So on the first day of this project, the children are actually lying there listening to their school, just completely quiet. Listen to the school and see what you can hear. Then we took them out about town. We took them to the local railway station. And what the children are doing there is they're listening to the sounds and using letters to invent words which recreate the sound of the station, all the sounds they can hear. There they are in a subway doing the same thing. There they are in an indoor market doing the same thing. And what you can see there is the look of intense concentration on their faces. But they were doing something that I remember doing in school, which was writing my letters. You know, going g, h, j. But suddenly, it's become a really interesting activity as they go around. Then we took them to the university in town, and we took them to a Turkish lecture. None of the children were Turkish, had ever spoken Turkish before in their lives, and they simply had to sit there and listen to Turkish and work out how to write it with the letters that they had. And then, and there you go, again, the same concentration, and I would say the same persistence. To be in a Turkish lecture when you've never spoken Turkish and to listen to it takes a lot of discipline and focus, but you can see it there in their faces. And then they come back, and working in small groups, they have to look at the words each person had come up with and choose the best ones and make them as good as they possibly can. And when they'd finished, there was a selection of words from each table, and it looked like this. this is from one of the tables. The word at the top is stotis, which is the Lithuanian word for station. They'd been to the station. And the first word underneath that is čektikas, and it's the word that the pupils came up with to describe the sound of a train coming into the station. Čektikas, 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 so forth. So they're just learning how to use their letters, how they fit in words, how to create words. So they're doing the basic steps of literacy, but they've done it in a way which applies all the principles of the high-functioning classroom. They were set challenges, not given answers. You work out how to use letters to capture these sounds. It felt very real to them. It was very physical. They moved around. They worked in groups. Their experience and their learning was absolutely central to that process. And there was plenty of space in that for reflection. So, in my view, learning about creativity is not something you do as well as everything else. It is how you should be delivering the curriculum in the first case. And every subject is capable of being taught in these ways. And the challenge is how to equip teachers to learn to teach in this way. It's the same number of hours in the day. It's the same subjects they have to teach in any case. But it is ensuring that these elements of the learning are going on. And that what isn't happening, certainly most of the time, is the kids are not sitting in rows listening to the teacher talking. The final project that I'll talk about is in Karachi, where we've been working recently. Because obviously for us, one of the big issues were, this is all very well working in Europe, but how does this actually translate into a very different environment? So Yari, where we were working, has this small school who we partnered with to help. It's a private, it's free, but it's a private school. It's run by a small foundation and by a remarkable woman who runs it. And it has an interesting set of rules. Children enroll at the age of 3. And the rule is that if the child enrolls, so does the mother, because most of the mothers are illiterate in Liyari, and the father has to go out and get a job. And I said, is that easy? He said, yes, the women get all the jobs. Here in Liyari, the women look after, have the babies, look after the house, do the work, and so forth. It's the men just lie around. So get them out. And I said, why? She said, because that fundamental family environment is central to learning. It's really hard to supply learning if you don't have those building blocks there. A literate mother, an engaged father supporting you in the process. And then she teaches them up to about the age of 8 or 9. And then she finds scholarships for them to go to private primary schools in the city elsewhere. And the issue that she wanted us to work on in Liyari was, particularly amongst the girls, is that they needed to develop their identity and a belief in their identity and their own voice. Because whilst she was making big progress in engaging them in the learning and so forth, she found that when they transferred to these other schools, they were crushed by the weight of the middle-class enthusiasm, if you like, which then descended upon the girls. How do we build that belief in themselves that they do have a right to be in education and so forth, because it's easily taken away. So we put in an artist to work with this group. There were a few boys in the group, but they were mainly girls, and the group was selected on the basis that they were the shyest, the most retiring, the least self-confident. And the artist that we put in there to work with them has a particular practice. She has a mechanized rickshaw on the back of which is a beamer, a projector. And she works in communities in Karachi, helping the communities make films about themselves. And then she drives down their street and sets up a cinema in the street and projects the films that they've made. And we asked her to go and work with the children on making a film about their neighborhood. And the project was actually also linked, as always, with the work we do with the curriculum. And one of the things that's important here is a lot of the best schools in Pakistan are English medium schools, and these kids don't have English, and therefore this was linked in to developing their English. So they set about planning the film that they were going to make, and they were equipped with just little mobile phones. Each child had to go off, explore their neighborhood, come back, and this was edited together as a film. And when the film was finished, they organized a public screening of it. And again, it was just in the street. And the rickshaw, you can see with the projector, is there at the back now. And the kids sent out invitations to all the people in the neighborhood to come and see the film that they made. And people came out and they swept the street and they put blankets out there. And I really like this image because how can you have a cinema showing without popcorn? So even the popcorn wallah came on this particular occasion. And a lot of young people arrived. The children, and this is them, then had to introduce their film, explain what it was about, and what were the insights into the neighborhood that they felt through doing this. And then the film was screened. Around 350 people turned up for this screening. Now, to me, what was absolutely important about this is a group of young girls standing up and sharing their learning and celebrating their learning with the entire community. That was the point of what was going on here. And the community came and saw it. And the impact that has on, actually, I want this for my girl as well. I want my girl to be standing there. And the confidence it gave the children in their own capacity and their own self-belief was absolutely central. And it was done by connecting it with their creativity. I've got a short clip from the film, which I thought we could share.
It is my Nanu's car. I like my Nanu's car. Its color is blue. I don't know what is this. It's door, I think so. It's my shadow. It is stones. Ugh, I don't like it. What is this? I think so it's math. Oh no, what people can do it? It's a bad thing. Come, let's go. She is my cousin. I love her.
Actually, that process of giving them a mobile phone and allowing them to wander around their neighborhood actually stimulates their curiosity. They look at their neighborhood in a completely different way. And you see all the characteristics that I was talking about in terms of the high-functioning classroom. They were set tasks, they were not given answers. It felt incredibly real to them. Time was used flexibly. There was a lot of group work involved. Emotion was absolutely central to this. You weren't just talking about the facts of your neighborhood. You were talking about the emotions of your neighborhood and so forth. And this creates a really deep learning experience for those young people, which the head teacher said has utterly transformed their lives. That group of young people who went through that. This isn't very complicated stuff. It isn't stuff that requires sophisticated technology they don't have access to and so forth. It does require us to work with teachers to help them understand how to do that. Not that they have to go away for a year to study something, because all the best learning for teachers takes place in their classroom with their children. And more often than not, what this way of working does simply makes the pupils visible to their teachers for the first time and allows them to understand who they're teaching and what they're learning. And that then allows those children to develop and to succeed. So our commitment is, how do we give the opportunities for teachers to learn to teach like this? We know these are the building blocks of what works. All teachers are capable of doing it, and if we had it, it would utterly transform the nature of education. Thank you very much indeed.
I have never met a girl who turned around and said, well, I don't want to go to school. I want to be married as a child, or I want to do the housework, or I want to take the goats out for grazing. I think what really becomes critical is the external factors that are actually impacting motivation for children, especially in areas where I work. In rural and tribal communities, it's the thinking is that a goat is an asset and a girl is a liability. What's the point of sending her to school? And you're actually finding that it's the external factors that are actually suppressing and crushing that child's motivation. And those are some of the pieces that we really focus on, is to say, how do we remove those particular barriers?
It's the crucial variable in education, how to keep children motivated and that they stay in school and continue learning, to learn.
Motivation is key for studying. You have to be motivated to continue your studies. I don't think it's an issue of demotivation. I just think that now teachers, or if you want to say the educational system, just don't know what buttons to press to make the learner motivated.
We had to challenge the conventional way of learning, of teacher-centered instruction, to the principles we know from 100 years ago. Active participation, student engagement, flexibility, not everybody learns the same thing at the same time. Give them time, everybody can learn. Relevance, that anything you learn can be applied with your parents and your community, as we saw in the videos we saw. Empathy and cooperative learning. You learn through dialogue and interaction. You're constructing knowledge. We have to give feedback during the process, not at the end when it's too late. So I think that's the crucial part. And if your role is not transmitting information, but making the right intelligent questions, stimulating, motivating during the process, I think that is the best thing. Unless teachers themselves are exposed to this type of training when they're being trained, how can we, they cannot make the change. So we had to transform all these variables and all this complexity into very simple, manageable actions so that any teacher in any part of the world without having a PhD could transform their pedagogy. And this is something that teachers can have control of.
I think parents obviously have a very, very important role. I have children, you have children, and we see parents are such an active part of educating your child. What in the communities where we work, the difficulty is that most of my children are first-generation learners. They have no history of schooling in their family. So their parents don't really have the capacity like we do. It's like if my child was learning Japanese. I don't know if she's doing a PhD or if she's just learning the alphabet. They are not really able to engage in that way. So we've actually created certain tools for parents to get involved. We have these school assessment charts for a parent to really know what is a good school and what is a bad school. The school that my child goes to, is it a good school? And these assessment charts are actually visual with the traffic light, red, orange, and green kind of rating that parents can do themselves. So we're actually trying to find these other ways in which we can engage parents actively into the school system.
What tactics and strategies do you employ?
We had to create champions for girls, but from the same gender gap villages, and that was first and foremost the most crucial piece. So we find young people, 18 to 25, who are literate themselves, train them 12 days a year for 3 years, so it's fairly intense, mentor them. And with that kind of help and support, that volunteer is finding every single girl, going door to door, mapping out who's out of school. And then they're actually talking to parents. And because they are from that village, they're tapping into a lot of local networks. Picking local examples, going back again and again and again and really creating that conversation, getting the village leadership involved, so getting other stakeholders involved. And actually that's what really helps to create change over a period of time.
In the past, say, 5-10 years, women have, because of their limitations, they can't go travel, they can't do it, they sought their freedom through their education. So they went to schools, they went to universities, they went and got their master's degrees. And some of them now, they all travel abroad and they go get their master's and doctorates and are professors or experts in their fields. Whereas, I feel that the men in our society, and maybe this is a generalization, but are very demotivated because of, how the population or society views education. My uncles were the same, in terms of oh, I'm going to study in school, but then I'm done, I'm going to go get a job. After a couple of years working, they realized, wait, I should have gone to college. And some of them did go back, and they went and they got their degree. Why? Because they realized that it's not the system that is important, I have to memorize. It's the knowledge and things they learn and how they implement it in their personal life, in their professional life, in their academic life, because it makes them wiser, it makes them more knowledgeable, and that I think is the most important, to have the freedom to make mistakes, learn from your mistakes, grow, and pass that on.
If anything you learn can be applied with a family, your self-esteem comes up. So these are the 21st century skills everybody's talking about, which is learning to learn, learning to take initiatives, learning to work in teams. And these are the essentials for continuous learning. So if you touch on these variables, going beyond just cognitive achievement, also socio-emotional dimensions. By the way, we're measuring all these social skills now because we feel that they're so important for academic achievement.
Training is the start of the conversation. The behavior change, because our volunteers are actually going into the classroom 3 times a week over 3 years, using puzzles, games, the creative activities to change the atmosphere, that it has to be over a period of time. The 3-day training of diets and teachers is not going to change it. But you have to use it as a process. But when you do that, the Pali district was the first district where we started working. It's not a small district, 1,067 villages, 250,000 children. It is no longer a gender gap district. So you can't have a single strategy. When things are so broken, you have to look at comprehensive solutions, and then you will actually see an equilibrium shift.
When young people are physically, socially, emotionally, and intellectually engaged, they are happy, and you have them. You have 100% of the child in front of you. You don't have to worry about motivation anymore. It's all about the relationship, and you've got to get that right. And if the teacher feels they haven't got it right, sit down with the kids and sort it out. Because if you can't sort that out, no learning will take place.
It is a whole ecosystem. It's not just about the child or the teacher, that there's so many other factors around it. So cultural, systemic, classroom interaction, all of it really needs to come together. And it can, and change can happen. And you can actually find those allies anywhere. We find them in young, literate people in critical gender gap villages. And it is possible. They have brought back 80,000 girls back into the school system who weren't previously. They've convinced parents. So we can see that change, but we have to look at the entire ecosystem to really enable that child's motivation to bloom.
It's not anymore that we don't know what to do or that we don't know how to do it. It's that it's not being done consistently and coherently. And to me, the key answer is if you want young people to grow up to be creative, what happens in the classroom has to change. And for that, the teacher has to change. Around 80% of total education budgets in the world go on teacher salaries. That's what it's spent on. It's the biggest asset we have, and we simply do not invest the money in developing them in the way that they as teachers actually deserve.
Asuntos Públicos, para conocer mejor, para saber más.